Hi, I'm Gary, and today is the first video on this channel where I'm going to be walking through my experience taking an adult reading test. So, I have dyslexia. I was diagnosed as a child, and yeah. So, to be honest, I'm pretty anxious about this because I know how much dyslexia affects my reading. I've always been a slow reader, and I quite often have to keep rereading the same passage or sentence over and over again just to fully understand what it's actually talking about. So, this test is a way for me to see exactly where my reading skills are and to begin to work to improve them. So, growing up, my relationship with reading wasn't great. When I was first diagnosed with dyslexia, I did everything I could to avoid reading because it made me feel frustrated and angry. I was watching all my friends and all my classmates getting on with their reading. They could just do it, it came with ease to them. But for me, it was a struggle, a constant struggle. So I did everything I could just to avoid it because I felt like I was failing. I was falling behind everyone else, and I didn't like that feeling. So in my mind, if I don't do the reading, I can't fail. So I just avoided it at all costs. But as I've grown older, though, I've come to realize that I want to like reading. The people I hang out with, they talk about this book they're reading or that book they're reading, and I'm just like, you're talking about reading as if it's something you actually love doing, and I don't get that. I still have that feeling where I look at a book, dread comes up, and I don't want to feel like that. So this is the beginning of the journey for me learning not to feel like that. So I'll admit I'm feeling really anxious when I have to read aloud. It it's not a good feeling. If I have to read aloud in front of other people, I don't like it. Makes me feel anxious, I feel nervous, but I'm very comfortable giving presentations. And I've done it in the past, if I stand up in front of a room with 180, 200, 300 people and I'm just giving a presentation, I'm absolutely fine. I can do that no problem. But as soon as I do that and there's a bit of paper in front of me with words on it that I've got to read out, my confidence goes. I get nervous, I stumble, and that shouldn't be happening. And that's what I want to overcome. And I think it's because in my head, I know that I'm a slow reader, and the people in the audience, they are going to think, oh, he's reading slow, but what? Or I'm going to start overthinking the words on the page, and I'm going to make reading errors. And then people are going to find that funny, and they're going to say, this guy, he's a professional, and he's an expert in this field, and he can't even read what's on the page. And that credibility is gone. And I overthink and I become anxious and nervous, and that causes my reading to get even worse. And I want to overcome that. So I'm actually a teacher, and I'm a teacher who specializes in dyslexia. So I spend a lot of my time encouraging children and teenagers to read and to love reading and to develop that sense of reading for enjoyment. So I think it's time for me to practice what I preach. I want to find ways to improve my own reading. So that's the accuracy and the fluency. But more importantly, I want to learn to love reading, just like I do with my students. So the goal of this channel is to document that journey, both the highs and the lows. And I also hope that others who struggle with reading will see it and see that it's never too late to improve your reading skills or even to learn to love reading. If I can just get one person and they benefit from seeing this, then I'll feel like I've succeeded. On top of that, I want to educate people about dyslexia. and how it can impact people well into adulthood. It's not just something that affects children and teenagers and young people. It affects everyone throughout their lives. It's a lifelong condition. So this video is just the beginning. It's an introduction of what's to come. I'm going to document myself reading. I'm going to do some book reviews, and we're going to see if I improve over time. I'm also going to do little videos educating people about dyslexia, how it impacts people in different ways, as well as strategies that people with dyslexia and literacy difficulties can use with their children, their teenagers, or themselves as adults to help them overcome these barriers. So I'm excited to get started. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm mainly excited, and I hope you enjoy coming along this journey with me. So the reading test that I chose to use was the reading assessment from QuickScreen. The main reason I went with this test is because it was one of the only ones I could find which was online and would score for adults. Most of the other ones were either paper-based and would require someone else to administer it to me, or they didn't cover the adult age range. So I went with this one. And yeah, so one of the interesting things about this test was that it involved a lot of passages that were about things I had no or next to no knowledge about. So there were passages on different types of camels or the Soviet Union, and I had very little knowledge of those, and I found that particularly challenging because the passages in it, there were 5 in total, the passages in it that I did have some background knowledge on, I actually found easier to read. And that made me realize I rely on my general knowledge or background knowledge when I'm reading more than what I do the information in the text. So I'll admit, and I am going to put the results up on the screen somewhere above me or on the side somewhere. I'm nervous about actually sharing these test results because I don't mind people knowing the difficulties that I have, but the specifics of the difficulties only my family, close friends, and managers and in my job know about the specific difficulties. So putting this information out there publicly on the internet is I'm a bit like, ooh, I'm actually doing this. But I think for this journey to be effective, I need to be as transparent as possible. And I think that's really important. So because I want to document this journey honestly and show my progress honestly, it means I need to show the good as well as the bad and everything in between. So ultimately, I'm hoping that by sharing this process and letting you see that it's okay to be open and honest about your dyslexia or your challenges with literacy, if I can show people what I'm dealing with, it will be seen as okay for you to share with others what you find difficult. And that's going to help others understand. But I'm also feeling quite empowered that I am going to be sharing these results with you. So I'm owning my journey, and I want to get the message across that you need to own your journey as well. The only person that can help you overcome your barriers, whether you have dyslexia, dyscalculia, general learning difficulties, is by you owning it and you being proud of it. Because I think that's going to be the key here, is that I need to be proud of my dyslexia. And just be confident enough to say, yeah, that's something I struggle with, but I'm working on it. And hopefully other people out there are going to do that as well. So I have to say, I was pretty surprised at my reading accuracy score. It's higher than I expected it to be. This does kind of match up with my daily reading experience. Because I teach a lot of phonics and letter patterns and spelling patterns as part of my job with children and teenagers, it seems like those skills have transferred to me unknowingly. So it's helped with my decoding skills. They've improved, and I haven't even realized it. And that's really encouraging. It feels good to know that my reading accuracy is solid. So I've got a solid foundation on which to build. So even though my reading can still be slow, and it takes a lot of effort, knowing that I have the foundations of accuracy in place is a big confidence boost. It's one less thing that I need to worry about when I'm reading. I also think that having strong accuracy will help me understand text better. So I'm spending less time trying to figure out what a word is saying, or how to read that word, or how to pronounce that word. It's freeing up a lot of space in my brain to actually focus on the meaning behind the words and the text. That, in turn, is going to help me improve my comprehension because I'm not getting bogged down with the mechanics of reading. It's letting me engage with the content more itself. When it comes to reading fluency, this is definitely an area that I struggle with. Often, when I come across a word that I have difficulty reading, my fluency just stops. And it's almost like my confidence drops with it. And I feel like I'm back to square one. And I have to rebuild that momentum from scratch, which can be frustrating. I do find myself pausing and stumbling over words, and sometimes I misread them entirely. But interestingly, I still use some of the strategies I learned at school, like sounding words out. So if I came across the word oh, cat, if I didn't know how to read the word cat, I would still use that strategy of going cat, cat. But that process halts the whole fluency process. And I'm then spending so much time focusing on that individual word, everything that came before that can suddenly be out of my head, and I would have to start again from that sentence. And that affects my fluency, and it can become a never-ending cycle. So I guess I've always hoped that improving my decoding skills would naturally lead to better fluency, but actually that doesn't seem to be the case. So we found in the test that my accuracy is fine, but fluency isn't. So accuracy and fluency, although they do build and impact on each other, actually fluency is going to be a skill I'm going to have to work on independently. So I definitely need to work on that. That's going to be part of the journey. Another big factor for me is anxiety. So especially when it comes to reading aloud, I get so concerned with making mistakes that it's actually affecting my fluency and my accuracy. It's like I get stuck inside my own head. I'm overthinking the process, and that actually makes it worse. It becomes a vicious cycle. I think I can't do it, so I slow down, and then I become less accurate, so I think I can't do it, and it's just a continuous cycle that I need to try and break. And then instead of reading naturally, I become hyper focused on not messing up my reading, which is making me make more mistakes in my reading. So I need to work on that. So knowing that my reading speed is slower than average, that's a little bit disheartening, though it's not really a big surprise. It feels like I'm constantly lagging behind. I know I'm not a failure, but sometimes that's the way it feels. And it can be demotivating. There are definitely times where I think about just relying on audiobooks or text-to-speech software rather than actually reading the text itself. But I think reading the text itself is more beneficial because you can take your time, or you can go backwards and forwards, and you can't, well, you can, but you can't get as distracted. because I've tried the audiobooks and I've had the headphones on and been going about my day doing my normal stuff, listening to a book, and I find that I actually stop listening to the book. It just becomes background noise. So where's the enjoyment in that? What's the point in that? So I don't do that anymore. And I don't want to do the reading anymore. And the text to speech I mainly use for my job. And if I begin using that for reading for enjoyment, I'm not going to want to do that because I associate text to speech software with the day job. And when I'm at home, I don't want to be doing work. So I really need to work on this. So my reading speed, it affects the type of books that I choose to read as well. So I tend to avoid the classics. I would love to read them, but the language, the style, all of that, that's not accessible to me. One day, hopefully this journey is going to help, I would love to read the classics. I would love to read Peter Pan, the original Peter Pan, and not one that's been reworked into modern English, or some of Jane Eyre's books, or my big goal is actually I would love to read War and Peace. I think that's way in the future. I really don't think that would be accessible to me just yet, but I would love to be able to read that. I find that I lean towards shorter books. So if it's between that 300 and 400 page mark, that's kind of the upper end of what I would read, because they look less intimidating and I feel like I have a better chance of finishing them. Because if I'm reading a book and I start stumbling over the words, or I'm finding it too difficult to understand or to decode, I'm not going to read it. I'll put it down. I will put a bookmark in it and put it down with the intention I will come back to it later, but I've already associated that book as too difficult for me. It'll end up on the bookshelf, never read. There's loads like that on my bookshelf. And a lot of the books I actually read are aimed at younger audiences because they are more accessible. So if you had a look at my Goodreads account, you would see a lot of the books I read are probably aimed at that young adult teenage fiction sort of area. So I've read most of the Percy Jackson books. I've read, I've read the Twilight books. I am the Harry Potter generation, so I did read those when I was at school, but I have reread them since. You know, I use the excuse I work in a primary school. These are the books I would read to the children I'm working with. Actually, that's probably my reading level. If I were to benchmark myself, my reading age would probably fall into that category. And as an adult over the age of 30, that is quite embarrassing to admit, but that's the level I'm at. That's what's most accessible to me, and I can read those with not a lot of effort, when actually there's a whole world of books that I should probably be reading instead of these young adult fiction books. And that was actually quite, I can't believe I'm going to be putting that out onto the internet, but dyslexia, that's where I'm at. I haven't really developed many strategies to help balance out my reading speed with my comprehension. I have to read at a slower pace so that I can understand what I'm reading, but I would like to speed that process up so that if I increase my speed, it will give me the confidence to read more complex books, longer books, and I'll be able to access a wider range of books. And hopefully that will then increase my enjoyment of reading, because I'm reading books that are more aimed at my age group and my demographic rather than young people, because I can't associate with young people anymore. I don't even understand the language they use now. So I want to be able to speed up my reading without sacrificing the comprehension and my understanding. So that's a skill that I'm going to be working on. Now let's look at some reading comprehension, my reading comprehension scores. So when it comes to reading longer and more complex texts, my comprehension definitely starts to slip. Dyslexia affects both my short-term and my working memory. And basically, short-term memory is how we hold small amounts of information for a brief period of time, and the working memory is how the brain holds and manipulates that information over a short time. Because of my dyslexia, I sometimes forget what I read at the beginning of a sentence or beginning of a paragraph by the time I get to the end. So I then have to go back to the beginning of the sentence and read it again, and sometimes again, and again. And this makes answering comprehension questions actually quite difficult because it often stops me from fully understanding the meaning behind the text because I end up focusing so much on remembering what it said, I'm not thinking about what it's actually saying. So I find I have to reread texts quite a lot, especially when they're complex or dense texts. And when I was at university, this was actually a really big struggle for me because I had to read journal articles and textbook chapters multiple times just to even remember what they were saying. And that was before even starting to critically think about them and understand them and grasp what they were actually talking about. And my degree was in psychology, so there was a lot of research papers with big fancy terminologies and descriptions of the brain. And I'm just like, it was frustrating, it was disheartening, and I just had to work through that and try and figure out strategies to help with that. And text to speech software wasn't a big thing back then. So it was just, I've just got to read it again and again and try and scribble down some notes about what I'm reading as I'm reading it, and that's distracting me from reading it. So the comprehension is hugely affected by my ability to access texts. So because of this, I've found that I rely more heavily on my general knowledge and knowledge of the world outside of what I'm reading, because then I can understand it better. If I already have a working knowledge of what's happening in the book, I can then read the book and rely on that knowledge I already have. So means that I tend to stick to genres that I'm familiar with. So I stick to things like post-apocalyptic books, horror books, and sci-fi because I already have a good understanding of those worlds through the TV shows I watch. So I like watching The Walking Dead and American Horror Story and Doctor Who. So I already have a general idea of what's happening in those worlds. Whereas on the other hand, I'll completely avoid genres I have no interest in. So sports. Couldn't care less about sports. So I have no knowledge of what's happening in the sports world to support that comprehension. So I would be able to read a sports book aimed at a teenager, wouldn't be able to tell you anything about it because I have no working knowledge of sports. So when I looked at my comprehension scores from the test, which are on the screen, I'm pretty okay with them because some of the passages that I had to read in the test, I had no knowledge of. I thought a camel was a camel. I didn't know there were different types of camels, so there was no background knowledge to rely on to support me answering the comprehension questions on a camel. Same with the Soviet Union. There was a passage about Stalin, and I was reading it. I had some knowledge because I did study World War II at school, and later on we did a whole unit on the road to World War II, and the Soviet Union was mentioned in that, and also the Cold War. We did a whole unit on the Cold War, so I had some knowledge, but not enough to support me with reading that passage. But then there were passages on plastics. I know some stuff about plastics. I did chemistry at school. I was able to piece together the answers from that. So I'm okay with the comprehension scores. And I know how I rely on my outside of the book knowledge to support my understanding of a book that I'm reading. But I'm aware it's something I need to work on. And I think that will come as the accuracy and fluency increases, I'm relying less on the skills to actually read the text, that I'll be able to rely on my skills to understand the text. Hopefully, that'll mean I can read more complex texts. The next scores was looking at my vocabulary and general knowledge. I feel that I have a pretty good vocabulary. It's not great, but it's good enough to get by. I can usually understand spoken language and spoken information more easily than I can written words, and that's pretty common with people with dyslexia. We tend to have very good expressive language, but the actual reading, they don't link. Sometimes I'll come across a word when I'm reading that I know perfectly well what that word means and I can use it in spoken language, but my dyslexia prevents me from recognizing it when it's in print form. It's like I know the word, but my brain doesn't make the connection the right way. So that becomes quite frustrating when I've been reading it and I get to that word and I got to spend a lot of time decoding that word, and when I finally decoded it, I'm just like, that's what that said. I know that word. Why couldn't you recognize that word? And it gets quite annoying. As for my general knowledge, I'd say I've got a fairly good understanding of a wide range of topics, but this test definitely was a challenge in some areas. So, like I've said, there were passages about history. There was one about, the final passage was about the civilization and empire that came after Genghis Khan. I've never ever looked into that. So that was quite a challenging passage to read and then answer questions on. And that made that comprehension part quite hard. So there was another part of the test. In the first two passages, there were anagrams of words, and I just could not see the word in the jumble of letters. And that's very common for dyslexic readers, is being able to actually work out what a word is from a jumble, an anagram. And the anagram word was laser, was the first one, and plastic was the second one. And it was just the letters of those words there, but I just could not find that word. And you couldn't move on in the test until you had done that. And I was ready to give up by passage 2 because I could not find the word plastic. But I'm hoping the more I read, the better my vocabulary will become. I don't have any interest in using big fancy words in my everyday life, but to have a stronger grasp of the English language and a wider vocabulary that I could use while talking, that would be great. But I'm quite happy with the language I use in my everyday life and in my professional life. I know what words to use, what they mean, how to define them to people that are unsure of them. But if I want to start reading the classics, then I'm going to have a wider vocabulary to be able to understand what is happening in those books. So I would like to get to the point where reading and understanding more complex text isn't as daunting as it's feeling right now. So hopefully I'll get there. It's really encouraging to know that my sequencing and organization skills are strong, because it doesn't feel like that in everyday life. I wouldn't say I'm the most organized person in the world. Sometimes I struggle with organizing my daily tasks and my activities, my to-do list at work. It's not the most organized. And it's always been a challenge for me. I'm one of those people that I have to physically check that I have everything I need before I leave the house. Just the other day, I was round at my parents' and I left my house keys there. And I didn't realize that I'd left my house keys there until I was 40 miles on my way home, and I had to turn around and go back. I had everything else, and I had checked that I had everything else. I even went, keys, patted my pocket, keys, car keys were there, house keys weren't. But I felt the keys, so I knew I had my keys, and off I went. And that's how organized I am. But knowing that I do actually have strong skills in this area is great, and that's a good confidence boost. I just need to learn to apply those skills to my everyday life. And that can be quite a challenge for someone with dyslexia. But one part of the test that I did find quite difficult was there was a list of words that were related to a passage that I just read that I had to put into alphabetical order. Now, I do know the alphabet and I know it in the correct sequence, but I couldn't, when I was putting the words in order, I had to go back to the beginning of the alphabet and recite it again, or there are certain hook points that I know in the alphabet, so I wouldn't have to go back to the beginning. I could jump straight in at LMN or QRS, but I was a lot slower at doing that. It wasn't natural to me to do that. So that slowed me down on those tasks, but I could do them. It just took me longer to do it. And if I'm honest, I actually don't understand. I mean, I do understand, but I don't understand how sequencing and organizing relates to reading. I understand how sequencing can help when we're summarizing a text. So if we read something and then asked to give a summary of what we've just read, I understand that, and putting it in a sequenced, logical order is important if we're doing a summary or saying a summary. But outside of that, I don't actually see what the direct connection is between organizing and sequencing and reading. So that's something I want to drill down into. Why are those skills required for reading? I don't plan on putting my bookcase in alphabetical order. So I want to dig a bit deeper into how those two skills relate to reading. And then maybe I will find out, oh, hey, actually, if I get good at those, it's going to help with the reading. Who knows? If anyone does know, let me know in the comments. So overall, I feel pretty good about my test results. It actually paints a much better picture than I expected. Of course, there are areas that need improvement and skills that I need to develop further, but it's reassuring to know that I'm actually within the average range for a lot of areas, and that's something I can build on. It gives me a clear starting point, and that's what this whole channel is going to be about. I've got my starting point now. Now we're going to work on building up those skills. So looking ahead, I think the key area I want to focus on is fluency. Developing my fluency will make reading feel less like a chore, and hopefully it will then become more enjoyable. So I'm going to start exploring different strategies that can support fluency improvement, whether that's through practicing specific techniques or trying out different tools, and I'll do videos on those. So here's ways that you can improve your reading fluency. I've tried them, this is the results I found. And then hopefully anyone who's watching who has literacy difficulties or reading difficulties or dyslexia can then start trying out those strategies themselves, and hopefully they will be able to see an improvement. And I'm going to track my progress. I think it would be really helpful if I took that same test again in either 6 months to a year's time, and that way I can see if there has actually been any improvement in my reading accuracy, my fluency, and my comprehension. And I think that's going to be a good way to measure the changes and to see how far I've come. And hopefully you'll come along that journey with me and we can celebrate that. Or if there hasn't been an improvement, we can come up with an idea together of how we can actually improve my reading and my comprehension. So I have to admit, I'm feeling a mix of both anxiety and liberation in sharing this personal experience with all of you. It's not easy to put your struggles out there for the world to see, but I hope this video encourages others to talk openly about their own experiences with literacy difficulties or dyslexia. I think the more we share, the more we can help each other. So the main message I want you to take away is that it's okay to find reading and literacy challenging. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Even though we face these difficulties, we also have many other strengths. For me, as I've said, it's music. It's always been a huge area of strength for me. And I'm sure others have their own unique challenge. Not challenges, well, yeah, their own unique challenges, but also their own unique talents. If we look at famous dyslexics, you've got Richard Branson, Cher, Octavia Spencer, Albert Einstein, apparently, Leonardo da Vinci. All these people are either dyslexic or suspected of having dyslexia. And they have their own strengths, and they are celebrated. We also have our own strengths and talents, despite dyslexia. So going forward, you can expect a lot of exciting content on this channel. I'm going to be reviewing books that I read and talking about how accessible they are for dyslexic readers. So if you've got dyslexia, I'll read a book, I'll tell you, yeah, this one was accessible for me, it may be accessible for you, or actually this one, maybe later on, it wasn't quite accessible just yet. I'm also going to discuss strategies that I've been using to help improve my reading and discussing how effective these strategies were. And then we'll do some deeper dives into dyslexia itself, and the impact it can have on our daily lives or our professional lives, and hopefully that will help people, not only help those with dyslexia, but hopefully also educate others who don't have dyslexia but want to better understand it or want to know that's how I could support my child or my teenager or my colleague. And hopefully it becomes a very positive place where we can celebrate dyslexia and we're working together to overcome it. So thank you so much for watching. I'm excited to have you join me on this journey. If you found this video helpful, or if you've had any similar experiences, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to, and if you want to follow my progress and learn more about living with dyslexia, that would be amazing. So thanks. See you later.